Welcome back to Radio Now's Urgent Conversation, coming to you live from Channels Amphitheatre in Lagos. Now, we are focusing today on insecurity in Nigeria. The military has found itself involved in operations traditionally reserved for the police, mostly because the force appears unable to tackle the security challenges across the country. The Nigerian Air Force is central to the military strategy in the fight against not just terrorists in the northeast, but also other non-state actors across the northwest and the southeast. Air Commodore Edward Gapquet is the spokesman for the Nigerian Air Force. I sat down with him and asked him if he believes the military is winning the fight against Nigeria's many conflicts. My apologies, I understand that there's a problem with that tape, and so we will start with the Chief of Defense Staff, General Leo Irabor.
Well, it all depends on the parameters of assessment. What is important is that within the geographic space itself, that is our country borders, what are the manifestations? Do the critical stakeholders, those who have the interest of peace and security in our land, independent assessors, do they have that, do they share that opinion? If you do a comparative analysis, and that is within the time frame that you have indicated, would that be their assessment? Would that be their judgment?
So what are the sort of things you would be looking at in comparing then and now?
Of course, just earlier on, you alluded to the fact that there are mass defections amongst the terrorists. Those defections didn't just come. It came because there were some focused actions and activities of,
and it's not because of infighting between the groups,
well,
which is what the story is out there.
Of course, there are multiplicity of factors, I must tell you, and of course, the most prominent being the kinetic impact of our operations. Kinetic implying the use of force. Right. We are countering force with force. These elements have had to defect. And so it's this defection to superior power that has led to it. We are not going to rest on our oars because we've had such high numbers defecting. But I'm only bringing it out to show that a lot has happened, quite a lot of mileage we have traveled along that path. And so if the Global Terrorism Index assessors do not or tend to discount those efforts, then of course I do not need to blame them. I only am more encouraged by the assessment of those that are within, who of course are part and parcel of the space itself.
Now, some have defected, but we've also seen some move into parts of the northwest and parts of north central, places like Niger State, for example, my own state, Zamfara State, increasingly seeing armed conflict by non-state actors that is as vicious as some of what we've seen with Boko Haram, in some cases even more. When you look at the conflict in the northwest, north central, and even parts of the southeast, what are sort of the peculiarities of the issues that the military is dealing with when it comes to these different conflicts across Nigeria?
When you have measures that have been taken to address those threats, the terrorists themselves and the criminal gangs themselves are not fools. There certainly will have to be movement to areas where, of course, if you make an area untenable for them, of course, they'll look for other areas that they
see. What does that do for your capacity and that of your people?
And that's the reason why our engagement, our actions, our activities also involve reviews of the threats, and then, of course, review of the approaches to management of the threats, and then looking at other factors to which the aggregate of all these assessments lead to, operational changes, re-strategizing, having to in place measures to cover up gaps that may exist from the assessment that we've done. And so when you see that some of those elements are moving to other parts of the country, namely the Northwest and the parts of the North Central, it's from that point of view. And so, of course, because we have also factored that, that reality, we have also taken measures to ensure that we do not, allow these regions of the country to, get to the stage that we experienced some time ago in the Northeast. And so it's a continuous exercise, a continuous process, and that's why we also believe that everything that has to do with defense and security is not an end; it's a process. The end itself is peace, the state of peace.
One of the issues that came up when we saw an attack on the Nigerian Defense Academy was you went online and Nigerians were saying, well, if the military cannot defend themselves, how can they defend us? Can you answer that question?
Have we not been under attack? That an attack happened at the Nigerian Defense Academy does not imply that we are not under attack on a daily basis. Do you know how many of the attacks we have had to ward off? The troops on the front lines, the terrorist elements, who are they attacking? Even in the Southeast, which you mentioned, who have they attacked? Police and then military. Now, the attack, very specifically on the Defense Academy, I think I've covered this in the past. It's one of those attacks that is more of, what I could liken to an armed attack, armed robbery attack of any unsuspecting individual.
So to you, it does not indicate a weakness in the army or in the military?
But in any case, that's a training institution. Now that it's called Nigerian Defense Academy or Military Academy does not mean that it's not the same as any other school. Of course, of course, I was embarrassed that we did not, we did not foresee such a threat. Nigerian Defense Academy is not a place where we could assume, we could think that we should fortify to such a level that the liberty that is required to be able to emplace, the level of leadership, learning, and skills, we lost. But that, of course, is a lesson we've, factored, and but that does not in any way, dampen the preparedness of the armed forces of Nigeria to do what it should. Now, it does not in any way speak to our weakness and our inability to defend the nation. No, that's not at all.
What do you make of the violence in the Southeast, especially given the fact that we seem to be dealing with a secessionist group that is prepared to take up arms for what they say is self-realization, and the military is present in the Southeast, and there have been allegations, all sorts of allegations, from extrajudicial killings to people even saying that some of the things that are happening are being staged by the military in order to make the indigenous people of Biafra look bad. That is the group that is agitating for secession. What is the sort of military's approach to that particular region and dealing with the violence there? Because I imagine it can't be the same as what you do in Borno and the same as what you do in the Northwest.
Well, the situation in the Southeast, it's not essentially what the narrative line. No, that's not correct.
Okay.
The situation in the Southeast, of course, there's some level of violence. The military is present, just like any other part of the country. Even before the escalation of violence in the Southeast, the military has always been there. always had different formations and establishments of the military in the southeast part of the country. In fact, there is no part of this country. So when you hear that the military has increased its presence in the southeast, I say, no, you're wrong. We have always been there. What you find is that...
So we've not seen more numbers of soldiers being sent there?
No, we even have less number in the sense that a good number of our personnel who we had to move to reinforce, the northeast, for example, and parts of the northwest. Of course, they came from somewhere. When they were leaving, there was nobody said, look, why are you moving these soldiers away from here? Currently, of course, there are levels of violence in the southeast, to which, by our constitutional demands, we should give support to the civil authority, in this case, the police. And that's the reason why we are engaged in different operations in the southeast and, of course, other parts of the country. All to the good of the citizens.
Do you feel that sometimes people forget that the military are also Nigerians and that they're people?
Of course. I mean, we are all Nigerians as soldiers. And so we wouldn't, of course, in any way take up arms against our kids and kin. It's not possible.
Do you feel
and for
that...
me, take for example, I mean, I'm sure you know where I come from.
Yes, I do.
So will I have to superintend over those that want to, indiscriminately kill, my subjects? No, it's not possible.
You have a budget of almost 3 trillion naira.
Yeah.
And this is the second highest budget in sub-Saharan Africa, second only to South Africa. Is it sufficient? Is that good for the resources that you need to wage these different campaigns that you are, waging across this country?
Can I tell you that resources certainly cannot be sufficient at any time? Yes, 3 trillion. What is 3 trillion? 3 trillion, of course, for defense, for the 2022 budget, which is good.
Yes.
So what's that figure? May I remind you that in the United States, for example, if you go...
we are not the United States.
I'm just giving you, because you made comparative, you talked about South Africa, and then, of course, ours being third, largest.
Second is the second largest in Sub-Saharan Africa.
In Sub-Saharan Africa. But I'm also letting you know that in 2021, in the US, the defense budget was around $705 billion.
Yeah, but the size of the economy is also different from ours.
1 minute. That, of course, translates to about 352 or thereabouts trillion. Now, the point here is, even though 3 trillion appears huge in comparative terms, you must also look at what it can do relative to the challenges that we have. But of course, I must remain very grateful that Mr. President has taken that bold step, and of course the Federal Executive Council, for them to have come to a realization of the fact that we must put security into its proper perspective and then begin to escalate interventions, and then to which that when it's done, everyone will be happy for it, so that, of course, in future, and when things will have normalized, then other sectors of the economy can now begin to take prominence in terms of attention. But I must tell you that is the right step in the right direction. Okay. Even though, of course, we would have loved that, of course, more will be given. But we also know that you can't be asking for what doesn't exist.
The military has, again, to go back to the issue of allegations, especially by organizations like Amnesty International, of, human rights abuses, in some cases with some evidence. Is the Nigerian military adhering to international protocols when it comes to combat? Why do we keep getting these stories of abuses by the military? Sir.
Let me tell you, the armed forces of Nigeria is a professional armed force.
Some of the evidence suggests
just
otherwise.
1 minute.
Go on, sir.
We didn't just jump in. We're not a ragtag army, not a ragtag armed forces. The challenge that we face today as a country is a challenge which in theoretical terms have been termed asymmetric warfare. This war has many fronts. There are those who are behind the scenes, both internal and external. And so when people come up with narratives, please do not discount.
Are you suggesting that there is another narrative war taking place?
Of course. But we won't be deterred by those shenanigans. So in some, we're a professional force. We have code of ethics. We have protocols that we follow. We respect human rights, all the international humanitarian laws, and of course, laws of armed conflicts. And besides being taught in our various establishments, they remain part and parcel of our operating protocols.
Do any of your officers face disciplinary actions? Are you able to share some of those with us so people can be reassured that you take, the necessary measures where officers are found wanting?
Across the theaters of operation that we have, there are standing court-martials. Besides, in various formations and units, there are on-the-room procedures, disciplinary procedures that have been in place. And we equally have our, our laws, operating laws, the Armed Forces Act, upon which all these things that we're talking about are well enshrined, and any contravention is dealt with.
Quickly on the regional issues, because I don't think we can talk about Nigerian security without looking at what's going on in Central African Republic, the Sahel, other parts of West Africa. Is it possible for us to secure Nigeria if some of these regions don't see security?
Because threats, criminality, have no respect for borders. And so this is the reason why we have engaged our neighbors, we have engaged in both at the bilateral and multilateral levels, all the countries in the sub-region. They hope that with a collective approach to this challenge, then of course we'll be improving on the situation back home. But of course, security must be viewed not from just national perspective. It must also, take into consideration what happens within the sub-region and, of course, the region itself, and even globally.
And since you have that broad picture with all of sort of the engagements that are taking place, both regionally but also, internationally, how soon is Nigeria going to sort of return to a situation where people are not getting kidnapped, Boko Haram is defeated, and people can generally feel safe?
Person, I would say, but may I remind you...
Soon, as in 2 years, 1 year, 6 months?
Just 1 minute.
Yes, sir.
May I remind you that currently Mr. President is in Glasgow, but the whole world leaders, they're in Glasgow. What has taken them there? That faces the world. Nigeria is within that global world, global environment. And so manifestations that you find in our shores, violent in nature, must also be linked to the global threat profile. But that it's not to mean that we will not escalate actions to be able to address them. And with what we're doing, I can assure you, and of course by extension the populace, that a lot of reprieve